Don't let any ignorant person say in your salat you can't talk to God. What did Zechariah do? Chapter 3, verse 38, verse 39. Zechariah was standing in his salah. What was he doing? Who was he talking to? Was he talking to following closely? He was talking to God in his salah. So you can talk to God. Some people misunderstand the concept. They think actually you come and stand and recite the verses like the Sahih Bukhari people, the Hadithiyun are doing. No, that is not the point. If you have to talk to God directly, we have certain verses you can recite to God. Let me give you an example. Somebody will say, why are you reciting the Quran back to God? I give you an example. Your boss, when you go to his office, is he not the same person who tells you how to talk to him or how to address him in the company? Can you call your boss, hey boss, come here? Can you say that to your boss? So he has to tell you. You understand? He has to tell you. When we check the context of the people who say you cannot recite verses back to God, yes, sometimes it makes sense. It doesn't mean I cannot recite verses back to God. It depends on which type of verses I can address to God and which type of verses I'm talking to the people with. Do you get the point? The Quran is to serve as a guidance. When you are doing the Salat alone, according to what Zechariah did, we can do the same thing. You can invoke God. You can call on God in your Salah. Right? It is allowed. Zechariah did. Remember, chapter 4, verse 26, it tells you that God is clarifying to us the sunnah of those who came before us, the examples of the previous prophets, so that we can follow their footsteps. Right? So good. So when alone, can I use my salah for dua? What do I need to do when I'm alone in my salah? So when you go to chapter 2, verse 153, this is what God says. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 153. This is what God is telling us. God says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, ista'inu bis-sabr was-salati, inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. God says, oh, who you have believed, or oh, you who believe. Ista'inu, this word ista'inu comes from Surah chapter 1 of the Quran, where we told God, iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. It is you we serve or seek, worship, and it is you we seek for help. The word ista'in is seeking help or seeking aid, right? So because we are seeking aid from God, that is why we say iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Then we told him ihdina sirata mustaqim, because we need the aid of guidance. We cannot guide ourselves. Remember that. You can't guide yourself. Only God can guide you. Only God can guide you, and he is sufficient as a guide and helper, according to chapter 25, verse 31 of the Quran. He is only sufficient as a guide for you. So nobody else can guide you. That is why God told the Prophet, chapter 28, verse 55 to 56, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ حَبَبْتَ. You cannot guide those whom you love or whomever you like. You can't. Only God guides. Right? So chapter 2, verse 153, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu ista'inu bis-sabr was-salat. So God is now telling you to seek help with your patience. Because if you are seeking help through something, you have to be patient. You can't be like, in a haste, always in a hurry. Just like God says, وَيَدُلُ الْإِنسَانَ بِالشَّرِّ دُعَاءُ بِالْخَيْرِ وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانَ أَجُولًا. That is chapter 17, if I remember very well, verse 11. Right? Yeah. The human being is in haste, always in a hurry. He needs something fast. So God says, "Ista'inu bis-sabr." You need to seek for help in your patience. You don't need to be in a hurry. Then was salat. So in my salat, I can seek help from God. So that is why Zechariah was doing that. Chapter 3, verse 38 to 39. We saw Zechariah seeking help from God from his salat. We saw it. Right? Good. Then God says, Inna Allah ma'as sabirin. God is with those who are patient. If you are not patient, God is not with you. Put that in mind. It's either you are part of Hizbullah or Hizbul Shaitan. Hizbullah, you have to be patient. Hizbul Shaitan, no patient. Now, let's go. So chapter 2, verse 153 tells us clearly that I can seek help from my salat. Yes? Call on God, just like Zechariah did. I can do the same thing. Right? That is, if I'm alone, just like Zechariah was alone in his mihrab. The word mihrab means a sanctum or a chamber. So I can do the same thing. There is nothing wrong with that. Right? Now, When you check chapter 2, verse 186 of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, remember in your Salat, you can use your Salat to invoke God, to call on God. Right? Now, remind you, the word dua is to call or invoke or supplicate or implore. You can do dua even without Salat. But the best place to do dua is you should rather do it in your Salat. That is the best place. I give an example. Let's say my boss is in the office, right? That I can go to him, or I can wait at the right time for an appointment with my boss, and I have all my problem and I tell him. Which one is better? Because if I don't wait for my own appointment and I go to him, something else will distract us. Of course, I can go to my boss if I want anytime, but the best preference is to go to him whilst the appointment is at hand. So that is why God gave the times for the Salat. It doesn't mean God is not available any other time. Supplication is different. I can do it any other time. But the best place to do your supplication is to do it in your Salat. This is what God told you. Chapter 2, verse 153. Ista'ini bis-sabr wa salat. But apart from that, I can seek help from God, whether it's not in the Salat. According to chapter 28, verse 24, Musa alayhi salam, he says, Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khayr fakir. He invoked God after helping the women to fetch for water. It doesn't matter, you can invoke God at that time. But the best place to invoke God with certainty that you know you are calling on God without a doubt that you will be answered, that is in your Salat. That is why Zechariah did the same thing in his Salat. So we are taking the examples from the prophets and the messengers. Remember that. Now, so I'm taking you to this verse. That is chapter 2, verse 186. And let's see what God says concerning people who call on him. Listen what God says. So God says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ ibadi anni fa inni qarib. Then he says, ujibu da'watu da'i iza da'ani. Then he says, فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. So God says, and whenever my servants, remember chapter 14 verse 31, God asked the prophet to tell the believers to establish the Salat. Right? So now, God is saying, and whenever my servant asks you, Muhammad alayhi salam, about me, God, that is God, then indeed I am near. I answer the supplication of a supplicant, or I answer the invocation of a what? Supplicant, when he invokes me, or when he calls me. So let them respond to me, and let them believe in me. Perhaps they will be well guided. Do you see? So that is why he said in chapter 40 verse 60, he says, Kul ad'uni astajib lakum. He says, invoke me and I will respond to you. This is what God says. But before that, make sure you have responded to God. What he asked you to do, do it. Don't go out of your ignorance and say, oh, God doesn't need my ritual. God doesn't need my prayer. What does he need? Is that what he told you? He told you he doesn't need your prayer. He told you that. Or you are following your own ego. You hear somebody who claims they're following the Quran alone, telling you, oh, God doesn't need my ritual. I'm tired of these rituals type of things. Then why are you following the Quran anyway? Cast the book out and follow your own desires. It's better. If that is your choice. If it's either when you go to work, you submit to what the boss tells you or quit. Simple. The boss doesn't need your opinion. If you come to a company and you are employed, it's either you do what the boss instructed you to do or you stop working. It's simple as that. What is the arrogance for? Oh, God doesn't need my ritual car. How can God tell me to pray? Look. Now let's continue. So we can see clearly I can use my Salat to invoke God. So for example, somebody will say, oh, why you don't have to use the Quran to recite it back to God. Really? Is that so? So let's check if it's true or not. Chapter 3 verse 26 to 27. Can I use the Quran and recite some verses back to God? Can I do that? Yes, I can. Remember, God is talking to people who possess intelligence, not fools. So an intelligent person knows how to use the book of God. It doesn't mean just take any verse and recite to God. That is not the point. Take verses in context which addresses to God and use it for your own situations and scenarios. You understand? Now, when you go to chapter 3, verse 26 to 27, the same God I'm going to do salat to, he told me to use his own book, take a dua from there and invoke him. This is what he says. قل الحمد قل اللهم ملك الملك. Then he says what? تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك على كل شيء قدير تولج الليل في النهار وتولج النهار في الليل وتخرج الحي من الميت. Then he says وتخرج الميت من الحي وترزق من تشاء بغير الحساب. Who am I talking to in this verse? Am I not reciting the Quran back to God? The same Quran. I'm using verses which is talking to God direct, to talk to God. So is it a problem if your boss tells you how to come and talk to him? If he says, if you come to my office, call me yes sir, is it a problem? He can tell you. It doesn't mean you should follow your own opinion on how to call God. Remember, you ask God to guide you. So he has to guide you on how to address him. Is it a big deal? No. You just need understanding. Put opinions aside. Put your desires aside. Because chapter 6 verse 116 says, وَإِن تُطِعْ أَكْثَرَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يُضِلُّوكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ إِنْ يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا ظَنًّا وَإِنْ هُمْ إِلَّا يَخْرُصُونَ. If you obey most of those on earth, they will mislead you from the way of God. Do you know why? They only follow assumptions. And they are only guessing. So why will you use somebody's opinion or assumption or guessing for your deen when God is talking to you clearly? If somebody tells you, I cannot recite the verses back to God, it doesn't mean go and stand in front of God and say, Tabbat yada abi labi wa tabba. No, who are you reciting to? It's either you are reciting to yourself or to somebody else, but not to God. But then we have contexts whereby you can speak to God directly if you are alone, just like the Zechariah did. Chapter 3 verse 38 to 39, he was talking to God alone. So in that context, he doesn't need to go and stand and say, tell God, Kul, who allow. No, no. Quran is talking to people who possess intelligence, not fools. Please. So chapter 3 verse 26 to 27, we can see it clearly. God is telling me to say, Kulillahumma, to say. So if I come in front of God, I don't mention the kul. Remember, he is now telling me to say. So I don't come in front of God again and say Kulillahumma. No. I will only say Allahumma directly to him. Allahumma malik al-mulk tu'til mulka man tasha. You understand? Now somebody might ask, is it necessary for me to read it in Arabic? No, it's not. If you can get the same meanings in context in your own language, you can address God in your own language. Chapter 30 verse 22. Remember, among the signs of God is the variation in our languages, the languages we speak. You understand? So you can address God in every language you want. Do you think chapter 28 verse 24, when Moses invoked God, do you think he was using Arabic language? No. Moses was part of children of Israel. He wasn't an Arabian. Do you understand? So he was using his own language to call on God. Do you think Zechariah chapter 3 verse 38 to 39, when he was standing in Salat to call on God to give him a son, do you think he was speaking in Arabic language? No. It was in his own language because he was part of children of Israel. He wasn't an Arabian. Do you get my point? So you can use your own language to address to God. Yes. Yes. So now we can see the example, chapter 3 verse 26 to 27. You can call on God, but don't use the kul. When you're talking to God, in your mind, if you know you are talking to God, don't use the word kul to God. Your boss cannot say, hey, Babs, come here and sit down. Then you also say, hey, Babs, come here and sit down. Well, he'll kick your ass. Now, chapter 39 verse 46. There is also another dua. Let's see what God says. You can use that to call on God. It is nothing wrong with that. All these things can be found in the Quran, but it depends how you use it wisely. You get the point. So for instance, chapter 39 verse 46, God says, قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ عَالِمُ الْغَيْبِ وَالشَّهَادَةِ أَنْتَ تَحْكُمُ بَيْنَ عِبَادِكَ فِيمَا كَانُوا فِيهِ يَخْتَلِفُونَ. Now this verse is addressing to God direct. Who is asking you to say? God. So if I come in front of God and I want to say this, I don't need to add the kul. I don't need to also say. Because I'm talking to God directly. So I have to start, Allahumma fatir samawati wal ard. عالم الغيب والشهادة أنت تحكم بين عبادك فيما كانوا فيه يختلفون. This is me and God directly. I can do it in my Salat. That is if I'm not in a group, if I'm alone, just like Zechariah was calling God alone. Do you understand me? Good. Apart from that, you can go to chapter 17 verse 80. What did God say there? You also see kul. God is asking you to say, right? He says kul rabbi adkhilni mudkhala sidq wa akhrijni mukhraja sidq waj'al li min ladunka sultanan nasira. So if I'm standing in front of God, I'll just take the kul out. Then I'll tell God, Rabbi adkhilni mudkhala sidq wa akhrijni mukhraja sidq waj'al li min ladunka sultanan nasira. Do you see the point? So I'm still using the verses of God, but wisely. Remember. So we see the evidences. For instance, again, when you go to chapter 23, verse 97 to 98, God asks us to also say, that is in Surah Al-Mu'min. Then we go to 97 to 98. So he says, وَقُرْ رَبِّي أَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْ هَمَزَاتِ الشَّيَاطِينِ وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ رَبِّي أَنْ يَحْضُرُونِ. So if I'm talking to God direct, I don't need to bring the kul, because he is now telling me to say kul. So then if it is direct to God, I have to say Rabbi a'udhu bika min hamazati shayatin wa a'udhu bika Rabbi an yadurun. That is to God direct. You understand? So I don't need to bring the kul when I'm talking to God. That is an intelligent person. You see intelligence. Good. All these verses are from the Quran, right? Like I said, any language can be used. It doesn't specifically have to be Arabic. The reason why some people can use Arabic because maybe they are more fluent when they are using it to address to God. Yes, but it doesn't matter.